Okay, demo time. So I have my sticky notes installed and we will just follow the steps here. The first step is to create a VM template. So let's go to Start menu and Compute Engine and then Instance Template. Let's create an instance template. I'm going to call it as UK VM template. And I'm going to have a very basic machine type. And the boot disk, I'm going to leave it to Debian. And under management, I'm going to have a startup script. Basically, this is what I have in my startup script. I will provide the startup script under the resources section so that you can use it too. All it does is it just updates the system, it installs Apache, and then it installs PHP, and then it creates index.php with the word hello world, and it prints the host name. So whenever the autoscaler create multiple instances, we will know to which web server we are landing to. So that's the idea behind it. Okay, let me minimize that. And under networking, I am going to leave it as all default, but I am going to give the tag HTTP tag so that port 80 will be allowed. And note that there is no region to specify here because this is template. And I'm going to create. So one template is enough for the autoscaler to create virtual machines. Let's now create an instance group. Let's click instance group and create instance group. And let's give this a name. I'm going to type it as UK instance group, and we have to specify in which location we want the autoscaler to create the virtual machines. Would you like that to be in single zone? And you can choose the zone here, or would you like to have that in multi-zone, which assures higher availability? So let's just choose multi-zone, and I'm going to choose Europe West 2, and I'm going to leave all the zones there. And then the instance template, I'm just going to use that template. And autoscaling, I'm going to leave it as on because we would like to see the demo for autoscaling as well. And you have different options here to choose. I'm going to leave it as CPU usage, and target CPU usage. You're basically telling autoscaler what is the minimum amount of CPU that the autoscaler should maintain in each VM in that instance group. Here I am going to specify 70. If one of my VM exceeds more than 70%, let's say it shoots up to 90% or 99%, then the autoscaler will create more virtual machines based on that instance template. Okay, the minimum number of instances I would like is 1, and the maximum number of instances, I do not want the autoscaler to go crazy, so I'm just going to leave it as 10. Although I mentioned that I don't want the autoscaler to go crazy, it is actually very smart. So even if one virtual machine shoots up to 90%, it's just not going to create 10 virtual machines right away. So you don't have to worry about unnecessary building here. And then the cooldown period, how long should the autoscaler wait before collecting information from a new virtual machine? Now what Google suggests here is create a virtual machine, install our application, see how long it takes, and specify that in seconds. But in my case, it's a very simple HTTP server, so I'm going to leave it as 60 seconds. And then the health check, this is where the auto healing takes place. And the health check, let's create a new health check. Let's type UK health check and protocol HTTP port 80 and proxy protocol none, request path that. And this is where we define the health criteria, how long to check, how long to wait, and so on. So basically we specify how often should our autoscaler check the instance. What you do not want to configure here is you do not want the autoscaler to check every single second. Because for some reason, if your web application has a slight glitch, and then if that unhealthy threshold kicks in, then it will start deleting the VM and it will create the VM using the template. So you have to be pretty careful here, like, how often to check and so on. But this is a demo purpose, so I'm just going to leave it as 5 seconds. And in timeout, how long should the autoscaler wait before it considers a request as a failure? I'm going to leave it as 5 seconds. And if there is 2 consecutive successes, then the autoscaler will think that the VM instance is healthy, so it will continue to monitor. But if the autoscaler experiences 2 consecutive failures based on the check interval and the timeout, then it will determine that the VM is unhealthy. So it will start deleting the VM and then it will create the VM based on the template. So with these values, I'm just going to click save and continue. Okay, so the auto healing throws a warning here and it thinks that the check interval is just too low and it's suggesting me to increase the check interval so that my instances do not get replaced too often. But this is a demo, so that's okay for me. And now the initial delay. Here you specify after how many seconds the first health check should take place. And we specify this value to give the instance and our application to fully start. In my case, I'm just going to have like, let's just say 120 seconds. And then let's click create. Okay, the instance group is created. Now what we will do is we will create an instance group for US as well, because I would like to have my virtual machines both in US and in UK. So let's create instance group and let's type US instance. Okay, again location, single zone or multi-zone. Let's go US Central 1 and let's just choose all zones. And the same thing here, UK template, auto scaling on, target CPU is 870, maximum 10, cooldown is 120, health check. Let's create a health check. US health check and HTTP, everything I'm going to leave it as default, save and continue. And Google is warning you here about the interval that I specified a very low interval. So it's suggesting have at least 10 seconds and have at least 3 times unhealthy threshold so that your VMs aren't replaced too often. I'm okay with that. For demo purposes, I'm going to click create. Okay, my US instance group is created as well. So far we have created the template, we have created the instance group. Let's create a static IPv4 now. Let's go to start menu, VPC network, external IP addresses, and let's reserve a static IP address. Let's give it a name. Since it is a hello world IP, an IP version, I'm just going to leave it as default. And the type is regional or global. I want this to be a global load balancer because I have my virtual machines in US and in UK because I have online customers in both countries. So leave it as global, reserve it. Okay, external IP address is created. And note that it is not actually in use. If it is not in use, you are going to get charged. That's just a general reminder. Okay, so and firewall rules. I have this default allow HTTP. I already have allowed my app and HTTP tag as well. So that's perfect. Now let's create a load balancer. Go to start menu and network services, load balancing. Let's create a load balancer. Let's start with HTTP load balancer. Let's give it a name. Hello world LB. And backend configuration, let's create a backend services to serve our incoming traffic. Let's type hello world backend and protocol HTTP, and timeout is 30 seconds. And this is the health check that I was referring in the slide. I'm going to leave it as 30. And the new backend instance group is UK instance group, and port number is 80. And balancing mode, basically balancing mode tells the load balancer when the instance group is at capacity. So if those instances in that instance group hits the capacity, then what the load balancer will do is it will start routing the traffic to the next nearest region. So you can choose utilization or you can choose rate. If you choose rate, then that's requests per second. And this is maximum requests per second. And this is per instance. So in here, I'm just going to go for rate and I'm going to type just 1 request per second and capacity. And I want that to operate at 100%. Done. So that's one backend created for UK VM. Let's create another backend, and this time I'm going to choose US instance, port number 80, rate, and that's 1 request per second, capacity 100%. Done. So the backends are created. Now the health check. Now let's create a new health check. Hello world, health check, and 80 requests, none, the same thing. Check interval is 5 seconds, consecutive failures, and so on. Save and continue. And session affinity determines how the traffic should be routed to the instances. So if you set to none, then what will happen is new request or routed to any instance, but traffic for a given connection will be directed to the same instance. Or you can choose client IP or generated cookie. It's totally up to you. I'm just happy with none. And in here you can integrate cloud CDN as well. And security policy is none. Basically you don't have any other choice here. And click create. So backend is done. Host and path rules, I'm just going to leave it as default. This basically determines how your traffic will be directed. So I already have the hello world at backend, so that's good. And front end configuration, let's specify a name here. Hello world. Front end protocol is HTTP, and this is where we will choose that external static IP address that we reserved. So that's the IP address. Port is 80. Done. And create. Okay, the load balancer is created. Let's go back to my compute engine. I should have some VMs here because the autoscaler has created the VMs. And let's access that instance IP. And that's specifying the instance name, which is that. And if I access this, and note the zones, this VM is in US, that VM is in Europe. And that is specifying US instance group. If I hit each of these instances IP, then I go to the respective server. But what if I go to the load balancer's IP? So let's go back to my network services, load balancing, and get the IP. That's my IP. Perfect. The requested URL was not found on the server. Now, if it happens the first time, please exercise some patience because it does take a few minutes for the load balancer to prepare a few things. So I'm going to wait here. Okay, I've just waited for about 2 minutes. Let's refresh it. Perfect. And that's working now. And it's directing me to UK instance group. Now, no matter how many times I refresh this, that will go to that UK instance group. That's because for two reasons. One, I'm based in UK. So the load balancer will see that, hey, this guy is coming from UK. So I'm going to forward him to this instance. And the second is also the capacity. So the instance hasn't really reached its max capacity. So the load balancer is happy to forward me to this instance group. Okay, now let's put one more theory to test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to log into this project B, and then I'm going to log into this instance-1, which is based in US. And the idea here is if I access that website from this instance, to which web server will the load balancer redirect us to? So let's test it. Okay, let's log into that VM and then use curl, try to get that website. And it's basically saying that's US instance group. Try again, US instance group. It doesn't matter because that hasn't reached the capacity and I'm accessing that website from a location in US. So that's working as expected. Okay, so we have seen the VM creation and the template. We have created the load balancer. So far we only have 2 virtual machines. And the autoscaler is set to monitor these virtual machines and the virtual machines in that group to make sure that it has not exceeded the 70% CPU, right? Okay, so let's put one more theory to test. We have specified to the autoscaler to monitor the VM instance's CPU rate and the rate we specified is 70%. So if the CPU in this instance shoots more than 70%, which is the specified value, then in theory the autoscaler should spin more instances, and then when it comes back below 70%, it should delete those VMs. So let's put that test to theory as well. Okay, kudos to user Todd who created this Python file. I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to log into my UK instance and then install that script. Okay, I've copied that and pasted in this Python file. That's done. And now I'm going to install a tool called CPU limit. And with CPU limit, you can control how much CPU your application can consume. So let's run that program Python CPU, run that in background. And let's look at top, and it will, oh yeah, it is consuming a 99%. And let's watch this VM instances page. What Autoscaler should do in theory is it should detect that the CPU has shot up to 90% or something like that. In my case, it's 100%, and then it should create VMs based on my setting. So let's refresh it. So there you go, it started creating VMs, and it didn't take much time actually, and it has created more VMs. And if I go to instance group, and if I click UK instance group, you can get some overview here, whether any more VM getting created or so and so. So now we have seen how Autoscaler has scaled up our number of VM instances based on CPU, but what about scale down? So let's go back to our console, and using CPU limit, I am just going to get the process ID, which is 8844, and that's my process ID for my Python. And then I'm going to specify you should consume only 50%. So let's log into this VM in a different window. Okay, logged in, top, and we can see the Python program is now consuming somewhere around 55%. In theory, the Autoscaler should watch all of this and then spin down some of the VMs. So it's been more than 10 minutes since I set the CPU limit to 50% for that Python program. And something to note down here, for the purposes of scaling down, the Autoscaler takes into account the very last 10 minutes of the virtual machine usage, and that's to decide how to scale down. It takes down the last 10 minutes because that ensures that information collected from that instance group is stable, and it prevents behavior where an Autoscaler continually adds or remove instances at a very excessive rate. And this also helps the Autoscaler to determine whether it is safe to remove instances. So the 10-minute delay might appear as a delay in scaling down, but actually this is a built-in feature of scaling. So that's something to take note of. Here you can see the Autoscaler have started to scale the VM instances down. So that confirms that the Autoscaler is doing its job. Okay, the Autoscaler has scaled down all the VMs that it created, responding to that spike in CPU. So I got only this particular VM now. If I go to VM instances, we can see only those 2 VM instances are there. And if I go to my website, and still everything is working as expected. So that's autoscaling and load balancing for you. Thank you for watching. Now let's move on to CDN.